Every time you hit a goal and felt nothing, that wasn't failure, that was information. The Upanishads identified the exact mechanism behind this 3,000 years before neuroscience had a name for it. Once you understand what you're actually made of, the chase stops and something better starts. In this video, I'll show you number one, why the happiness you're chasing is the wrong kind, and what the Vedic texts call the difference between Sukha and Ananda. Number two, the exact reason knowing about the hedonic cycle doesn't stop you from feeling it and what's actually keeping you stuck. Number three, a concrete morning practice rooted in santosha that rewires your relationship to contentment from the ground up. Let's get into it. A guy I spoke with last year had just closed the biggest deal of his career, six-figure commission. He'd been chasing that number for 4 years. He told me he sat in his car in the parking garage after signing the paperwork and waited to feel it, the big feeling. It didn't come. What came instead was a quiet, creeping thought. Is this it? He wasn't depressed. He wasn't ungrateful. He just felt nothing where he expected everything. That moment, that specific silence in a parking garage, is what this entire video is about. The Sanskrit word for ordinary happiness is sukha. It literally means good wheel, as in a chariot wheel that's well fitted to its axle, smooth ride. And the opposite, dukkha, the word usually translated as suffering, literally means bad wheel, a wheel that wobbles, grinds, throws you off course. That's not a coincidence. The people who built this framework were telling you something structural about the nature of pleasure. Sukha is conditional. It depends on the wheel being fitted correctly. It depends on external conditions aligning, and the moment those conditions shift, the wheel wobbles again. The Vedic texts, particularly the Taittiriya Upanishad, describe 5 layers of the self. The outermost layer is the physical body. Inside that, the energy body. Inside that, the mind. Inside that, the intellect. And at the very center, what they call the Ananda Maya Kosha, the bliss sheath, the layer of pure, unconditional Ananda. Ananda is not an emotion. It doesn't require a trigger. The texts describe it as your baseline nature, not a state you achieve, but the ground you're standing on. The problem is that most of us have never been still enough to feel it, because we've been sprinting across the surface looking for sukha. This is the distinction no one makes in the mainstream conversation about happiness. Everyone talks about the hedonic treadmill, the dopamine loop, the way good feelings fade, but they're all describing sukha and calling it happiness. They're diagnosing the symptom without naming what's underneath. The Bhagavad Gita is even more direct. In chapter 5, Krishna describes the person who finds joy within themselves as a yogi who has attained Brahman, not someone who has acquired more, someone who has stopped looking outward for what was always inward. A comment I see constantly on videos like this one: I achieve everything I wanted and still feel empty inside, like something is fundamentally broken in me. That person is not broken. That person is accurately perceiving that sukha cannot fill an ananda-shaped hole. The emptiness is not a malfunction, it's a compass. The practical implication of this is immediate. If you've been treating happiness as a destination, as something you'll feel once the deal closes, once the relationship lands, once the number hits, you've been chasing sukha and calling it fulfillment. Those are two different things, and confusing them is the source of the exhaustion so many people carry. The first shift is simply this: stop auditing your life for whether it's making you happy. Start asking whether it's moving you toward the center or away from it. There's a comment that stops me every time I see it. People write, I know about the hedonic treadmill intellectually, but knowing it doesn't stop me from feeling it. That is one of the most honest things a person can say, and it points to something the Vedic framework gets exactly right, that Western psychology mostly misses. Knowing is not the same as being. The Sanskrit word for this distinction is vijnana versus jnana. Jnana is information, intellectual understanding. Vijnana is realized knowledge, the kind that changes how you move through the world, not just how you think about it. You can understand that sugar spikes and crashes your energy and still reach for the cookie. You can understand that social media comparison triggers cortisol and still open the app. The gap between knowing and being is not a willpower problem, it's a depth problem. The understanding hasn't gone deep enough to touch the part of you that actually makes decisions. The Vedic texts describe this through the concept of vasanas. Vasanas are deep seated impressions, grooves worn into the subtle mind by repeated patterns of thought and desire. Every time you've chased a feeling of validation, of achievement, of pleasure, you've deepened that groove. The groove doesn't care what you know, it runs automatically. Modern neuroscience has a direct parallel, the default mode network. The DMN is the brain's background hum, the network that activates when you're not focused on a task. It's where rumination lives, where craving lives, where the automatic reach for the next thing comes from. Studies on long term meditators show that consistent contemplative practice physically quiets the DMN. The groove gets shallower. But here's the part that matters for why you're still stuck, even after you've done the reading, watched the videos, understood the framework. Intellectual engagement with ideas about happiness actually activates the default mode network. You're thinking about the problem. Thinking is a DMN activity. You are, in a very literal neurological sense, feeding the loop by analyzing the loop. The Katha Upanishad describes the self as a rider in a chariot. The body is the chariot, the senses are the horses, the mind is the reins, and the intellect is the driver. Most people live entirely at the level of the horses. Some people, the ones who have done the reading, have climbed up to the driver's seat. But the Upanishad says there's a rider above even the driver. That's the witness, the awareness that watches the whole thing without being caught in it. The reason knowing doesn't break the cycle is that knowing lives in the driver's seat, the vasanas live in the horses, and the only thing that can quiet the horses is not more instruction from the driver, it's contact with the rider. That contact is not metaphorical, it's experiential. It happens through specific practice, not through more understanding. And that's exactly why the comment, I know about this, but I still feel it, is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that the person has maxed out what the intellect can do on its own and is ready for the next layer. Why happiness never lasts at the level of the intellect is answerable, but why it never lasts in your lived experience, that answer requires a different kind of access. Santosha is one of the niyamas in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's usually translated as contentment, and that translation, while accurate, is almost useless because contentment sounds passive, like giving up, like settling. Santosha is not a mood, it is a discipline. Patanjali describes it as a practice, something you do, not something you feel when conditions are favorable. The full phrase is Santosha Anuttama Sukha Labha, which translates roughly as from the practice of contentment, unsurpassed joy is obtained, not peace, not acceptance, unsurpassed joy, Anuttama, the highest. That's a very different claim than be grateful for what you have. That's a claim that radical contentment, practiced deliberately, opens access to Ananda, the unconditional bliss that is your baseline nature. The practice I'm going to give you is built on three moves. It takes between 8 and 15 minutes. You do it in the morning before your phone, before your to do list, before any input from the outside world. Move 1. Stillness before stimulus. Before you check anything, sit for 3 minutes, not meditating in any formal sense, just sitting. The goal is to catch the mind before it starts running its default program. The DMN activates within seconds of waking, especially if you reach for your phone. Those first 3 minutes of stillness interrupt the automatic launch sequence. You're not doing anything, you're just not doing the thing. Move 2. The Santosha inquiry. Ask yourself one question, out loud or in writing. What is already complete right now? Not what are you grateful for, not what went well yesterday, what is already complete. The distinction matters. Gratitude is often comparative. You're grateful because things could be worse. Completeness is absolute. It's asking the mind to locate the ground beneath the wanting, the place that doesn't need anything added to it. Most people find this question disorienting at first. The mind wants to answer with things. My health is okay, my family is fine. That's not wrong, but keep going. At some point, if you stay with the question, you hit something that isn't a thing, a quality of awareness itself that isn't lacking anything. That contact, even for 30 seconds, is contact with Ananda, not a concept, an actual felt sense. Move 3. One intentional act before the reactive day begins. Before you respond to anything, do one thing you chose, not something you have to do, something you chose. It could be 5 minutes of reading something that feeds your deeper nature. It could be a short walk. It could be writing one sentence about what matters to you. The point is to begin the day from the inside out, from choice rather than reaction, from the rider rather than the horses. This three move sequence does something specific neurologically. It quiets the default mode network before it gets momentum. It interrupts the Vasana groove before the day deepens it, and it creates a daily point of contact with something that is not conditional, not dependent on what happens next. The people who do this consistently, not perfectly consistently, report a specific shift, not that they stop wanting things, not that they become indifferent to outcomes, but that the wanting loses its desperation. The craving softens into preference, and that shift is the difference between why happiness never lasts when you're chasing it and why contentment starts to feel like a floor rather than a ceiling. You don't need to believe in the Upanishads for this to work. You need to do it for 14 days and pay attention to what happens. If you've tried some version of this on your own and you still find yourself back on the treadmill by day 4, that's not a discipline problem. That's a signal that something specific in your pattern needs to be seen clearly before it can shift. That's exactly what the free consultation call is for. It's 15 to 30 minutes, one on one, no pitch, no agenda, except to look at where you actually are and what the next real step is for your specific situation, not a generic prescription. Your situation. You'll walk away from that call with a clear next move, whether we ever talk again or not. The link to book is in the description. It's free and the spots are limited. So if you have been sitting with that feeling of, I know this stuff, but I still feel it, that call is the fastest way through. If this kind of teaching is useful to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Tell me in the comments, when was the last time you hit something you'd been chasing and felt nothing where you expected to feel everything?